Right now, I'm standing in the middle of my own kitchen, and the water coming out of my tap is clean enough to drink. I built this whole place for $200. Every wall, every barrel, every board was salvaged, scavenged, or free. This is a true story. It's my story. For almost 2 years, I lived with no clean water and no health care at all. The thing that finally changed everything cost me less than a bag of groceries, and it was a discarded object nobody at the scrapyard even wanted. Let me take you back to when I had nothing, and let me show you it works even if you own no land and have almost no money. Let me start with the tap, because that's the part people don't believe. When I turn it, the water runs clear. I fill a glass, I hold it up to the window, and there's nothing floating in it. No smell, no brown tint. For most of my adult life, that would have looked like a miracle to me, because I spent a long time drinking whatever I could haul, boil, and hope wouldn't make me sick. And now it just runs quiet and clean in a house that costs less than 1 month of the rent I used to break my back paying. I want you to see this room the way I see it. The walls are lined with foam board I pulled out of a construction dumpster, still wrapped in plastic, still perfect. The counter is a solid core door I found leaning against a fence with a free sign taped to it. The light over my head runs off a single panel I bought secondhand. It is small, it is mine, and every single piece of it came from something somebody else threw away, including the building itself. But to understand how I got here, you have to understand where I was standing, exactly 2 years before this. I was living in my car in a grocery store parking lot, and I remember one specific night in November when the temperature dropped to 28 degrees and I woke up because I could see my own breath inside the windshield. I had 3 plastic gallon jugs of water on the floor of the back seat, and by morning, 2 of them had a thin skin of ice on top. That was my whole water supply. That was my whole life, sitting frozen on the floor mat of a car I couldn't afford to keep running. I didn't end up there because I was lazy. I want to say that plainly, because for a long time, the people around me acted like there had to be some secret failure in me to explain it. The truth is much more boring and much more common. I had a medical bill. Then I had another one. I lost the job that gave me insurance, and the moment I lost the insurance, the bills stopped being manageable and started being a wall. I was one of the millions of people in this country who are one hospital visit away from the street, and I found out the hard way that the gap between having a home and having nothing is thinner than anyone wants to admit. Here's what nobody tells you about being that broke. Water becomes the whole day. When you don't have plumbing, you don't just miss showers. You spend hours figuring out where to fill jugs, how to carry them, where to go to the bathroom, how to wash a shirt, so you look employable enough to get hired back into the same system that dropped you. I was filling containers at a gas station spigot and a cemetery tap, and I was rationing it like it was gasoline, because in a way it was more valuable than gasoline. You can walk without gas. You cannot walk long without water. And the healthcare piece sat on top of all of it like a second weight. I had a tooth going bad and a cough that wouldn't leave, and I did the math every single day on whether a clinic visit was worth skipping meals for a week. That's the quiet cruelty of it. When you have nothing, staying alive costs money you don't have, and the systems that are supposed to catch you are built so that reaching them costs more than you can pay. I stopped expecting anyone to help. I started looking instead at what people were throwing away, because here is the thing I noticed in those parking lots and those alleys behind the strip malls. This country throws away an unbelievable amount of usable material. I watched a hardware store toss out dozens of foam insulation boards because the corners were dinged. I watched a moving company leave pallets stacked by a fence for anyone to take. And I started to think, if there's this much good stuff in the trash, maybe the reason I have nothing isn't that there isn't enough. Maybe it's that I was taught to only want the version that comes with a price tag. That's when I found the box. I want to tell you exactly what it was, because it's the part people never expect. It was the cargo body off an old delivery truck, the big aluminum box that sits on the frame. The truck itself had died, the engine was gone, and a small trucking outfit outside of town had the box sitting in the back of their lot, rusting at the corners, filling up with rainwater. It was 20 feet long and about 8 feet wide and 8 feet tall on the inside. That is 160 square feet of dry, rigid, weatherproof shell that somebody was paying to have hauled to scrap. I asked the owner what he wanted for it. He looked at me like I was a little bit crazy, this woman in a beat-up car asking about his garbage, And he said if I could get it off his lot, I could have it for $50. $50. I had $110 to my name that week, and I stood there in that gravel lot and I did the hardest math of my life because handing over $50 meant almost cleaning myself out, and I had no idea yet if this box could actually become a home. I said yes, and the way his face changed still sits with me. It wasn't cruel exactly. It was that look people give you when they've already decided you're a lost cause and you've just confirmed it. He figured I'd waste my last money on a rusty box and end up worse off. And he wasn't shy about saying that a project like that was no place for someone in my situation. That was the first time somebody said out loud what a lot of people had been thinking. It would not be the last, but that box was going to prove every one of them wrong, and it started with getting it moved. Now, I did not have a truck that could haul 20 feet of aluminum box. This is where I want to be honest about the mistakes, because the polished stories that skip the failures are the ones that make you feel like you could never do it. I first tried to find free help online, and I got stood up twice by people who said they'd bring a trailer. I lost a week. I nearly gave the whole thing up. Then I found a guy with a flatbed who did junk hauling, and I offered him $40 and a promise, and he moved it for me to a piece of land I want to tell you about next, because the land is the part that stops most people before they even start. Here's the truth about the land, and it's the piece I wish someone had handed me 2 years earlier. You do not need to own acres. I found a man with a few unused acres of rural property who let me place my box on the back corner in exchange for keeping an eye on the place and paying him $25 a month. That arrangement has a name in a lot of rural communities. It's called land sitting or a caretaker arrangement, and there are more people sitting on empty land who want a set of eyes on it than you would ever guess. I found mine by asking at a feed store and leaving a note on a bulletin board, not online, on a cork board with a thumbtack, the old way. So now I had a 160 square foot aluminum shell sitting on borrowed land, and I had about $15 left. And winter was coming. If you've never lived through a real cold night with nothing between you and the outside but a thin metal wall, let me tell you what that box was like before I insulated it. Aluminum does not hold heat. It steals it. On a cold night, the inside of that box was colder than the air outside, because the metal pulled the warmth straight out of everything. My first night in it, I woke up shivering so hard my teeth were chattering, and I thought, I have traded a car for a metal freezer. But that's exactly the problem I'd been watching the answer to for months in those dumpsters. Insulation. The single biggest thing standing between a cold metal box and a warm home is trapped air. And trapped air is almost free if you know where to look. I went back to that hardware store, and I talked to the man loading the dumpster, and I asked if I could take the damaged foam boards. He shrugged and said, "Take all of it. It's going to the landfill anyway." I filled my car 4 times. I pulled out enough rigid foam insulation to line every wall, the ceiling, and the floor of that box, and it had cost the store money to throw it away and cost me nothing to save it. I cut each board with a bread knife and a straight edge, and I friction fit them between thin wood strips I screwed to the inside of the box. 2 layers on the walls, because I had the material and the cold demanded it. Rigid foam like that carries an insulation value of around 5 per inch of thickness, so 2 inches gave me an R value of about 10 on the walls, and I doubled it in the ceiling where heat escapes fastest. The first night after I finished the walls, I lit a single candle inside as a test, and the temperature held, 1 small flame. The difference between suffering and surviving was a stack of boards somebody threw in the trash. Therefore, the box was becoming a room. But a warm box with no water is still just a warmer version of the car, and water was the thing that had ruled my whole life. This is where I have to tell you about the part that nearly broke me, because I made an expensive mistake with water first, before I found the cheap thing that actually worked. I want you to learn it without paying what I paid. My first idea was to buy water. There was a machine outside a store where you could fill your own jugs for 35 cents a gallon, and I told myself that was manageable. But a person uses more water than they think. Cooking, cleaning, washing, drinking. I was going through 15 to 20 gallons a week at the very least, and hauling it in gallon jugs in a car with a bad tire, and the cost was quietly eating the tiny bit of money I was scraping together. I did the math one afternoon sitting in that store parking lot and realized I was on track to spend more on water in a year than I'd spent on the entire box and all its insulation. That was the moment I stopped trying to buy my way out and started looking up. Up, because the answer was falling out of the sky for free. Rain. That aluminum box had a roof, and a roof is a collection surface. Here is the number that changed how I saw everything, and I want you to hold on to it. 1 inch of rain falling on 100 square feet of roof gives you about 60 gallons of water. My roof was 160 square feet. That meant a single inch of rain could hand me close to 100 gallons for nothing, as long as I had somewhere to put it. So I needed barrels, and this is the next thing people spend too much on. Brand new rain barrels at a garden store run $70, $80, $100 each. I couldn't do that. But I called around to car washes and bakeries and a soda bottling place because those businesses get their soap and syrup shipped in food-grade 55-gallon barrels, and they are thrilled to have you take the empties away. I got 3 food-grade barrels for $10 each, $30 for 165 gallons of storage. I ran a simple gutter along the low edge of the roof, made from a piece of bent metal flashing, and I aimed it into the first barrel with the barrels linked together so the overflow filled the next. The first real rain after I set that up, I sat inside my warm insulated box and I listened to the water running into those barrels, and I cried. Not because it was sad, because for the first time in almost 2 years, I wasn't going to have to go beg a spigot for the thing that keeps you alive. I had 165 gallons filling up for free while I sat still. The man at the scrapyard thought I'd waste my money. The systems that sent me the bills thought I'd disappear, and I was sitting in a home catching my own water out of the sky. Now I need to talk to you directly, because if you're still with me, there's a good chance part of you is thinking this could never be you. Maybe you're watching this from an apartment you're about to lose, or a house that isn't really yours anymore, or a car like the one I slept in. Maybe you have $40 and a lot of fear. This next part is built for you, specifically because I remember exactly what it felt like to think that starting anything required money and land and skills I didn't have. It doesn't. Let me give you the thing you can start with this week, with almost nothing. Start with 1 barrel, just one. 1 food-grade 55-gallon barrel, which you can get free or nearly free from the businesses I mentioned. And even if you have no house, no roof, no land, that barrel is the beginning of independence, because water independence is the first freedom. You can collect off any surface. A tarp strung between 2 poles funnels rain into a barrel. A shed roof, a porch, a friend's garage, anything with a downward slope and an edge. The skill is nothing. You tilt a surface toward a container. That is the whole secret that businesses charge you hundreds of dollars to complicate. 1 inch of rain on 100 square feet is 60 gallons, and you can catch it on a plastic sheet you already own. And if you have no rain coming for a while, start collecting the knowledge instead of the water. Start asking at feed stores about land sitting. Start watching which dumpsters near you fill with foam board and pallets and doors. I promise you, once you start looking at the world as full of discarded materials instead of things you can't afford, your whole situation begins to shift, because scarcity is partly real and partly a story we've been sold. I was told I had nothing. What I actually had was a country that throws away enough to build a home, and eyes that finally learn to see it. But collecting rainwater brings you face to face with the problem that ruled my life the longest, and the one I promised you at the start. Because rainwater running off a metal roof and sitting in a barrel is not clean. It carries dust, bird droppings, bacteria, whatever landed on the roof. Drinking it straight will make you sick. And I know because early on I drank barrel water that hadn't been treated, and I spent 2 days so ill I couldn't stand. I had water now, but I still didn't have safe water, and buying bottled water forever would have put me right back where I started, quietly bleeding money I didn't have. This is the exact spot where most people give up and go back to paying. And this is where the discarded object I promised you at the very beginning finally comes in. Here's the thing that changed everything, and it cost me almost nothing, and I had never heard of it in my whole life until I went looking. It's called a biosand filter. It is a method that has been documented and used in developing countries for decades, studied by public health researchers, and it removes up to 98 to 99% of the bacteria and parasites out of dirty water using nothing but sand, gravel, and gravity. No electricity, no cartridges to buy forever, no power bill, just layers of material inside a container, and the science of how water and living things behave. Let me tell you exactly how I built mine, because this is the part I wish somebody had shouted at me 2 years earlier. I took one of those food-grade barrels. In the bottom, I put a layer of clean gravel, a few inches deep. On top of the gravel, I put a layer of coarse sand. And on top of that, the thick main layer, I put fine sand, screened clean, nearly to the top. I ran a pipe from the bottom that curves up the outside, so the water level always stays a couple inches above the top of the sand. That standing water is the secret, because within a week or two, a living layer forms on the top of the sand, a biological layer that actually eats the harmful organisms in the water as it passes through. The sand catches the particles, the living layer destroys the pathogens, gravity does all the work. The whole thing cost me almost nothing. The barrel I already had. The sand and gravel I got from a landscaping supply for under $15, and honestly, you can wash and screen sand from a lot of places for free. I poured my rainwater in the top, and clean water came out the bottom pipe, and I tested it and treated the first output batches carefully while the biological layer matured, the way the research says to. Within 2 weeks, I had a filter that turned my free roof water into water I could drink, cook with, and wash in, and it cost me less than $15, and it has kept working every single day since, with nothing but occasional cleaning. Think about what that means. The thing that had ruled my entire life, the thing that kept me tied to spigots and cemeteries and gas stations and last dollars, the thing that made me sick and made me scared, was solved for under $15 with sand in a barrel somebody threw away. Not a machine. Not a monthly bill. Not a system I had to qualify for or beg from. Sand, gravel, gravity, and a little patience while nature did the rest. That is the whole finale. That is the object at the scrapyard nobody wanted, turned into the tap I showed you at the start. And once I had clean water for almost nothing, everything else fell into place faster than I ever believed it could. If you want the full step-by-step of everything I did, the exact filter build, the barrel sourcing, the insulation cuts, the land arrangement, I wrote all of it down in a digital book called Built from Nothing, and it's also part of the First Shelter and Build Deeper guides I put together. Everything is at shelterfromnothing.com, linked in the description, and it's $97 for the complete set. I priced it that way because I wanted it to be reachable for the person who's already stretched thin, not another wall between you and the knowledge you need. Now, back to where I was, because once I had clean water for almost nothing, everything else fell into place faster than I ever believed it could. The healthcare piece even started to ease, because so much of what had been wearing my body down was the constant strain of being dirty, cold, dehydrated, and stressed. When you have warm shelter and clean water, you get sick less. You heal, you sleep. I found a free community clinic and got the tooth handled once I wasn't spending every dollar and every hour just surviving. The home didn't just give me a roof. It gave me back the margin to take care of the body I'd been neglecting because I couldn't afford not to. Let me give you the full count, because I promised you $200 and I keep my word. The box, $50. The hauling, $40. The insulation, free from the dumpster. The barrels, $30. The sand and gravel for the filter, $15. The door and the counter, free. The solar panel and small battery I added later, bought secondhand, brought me right up to around $200, all in, spread over months as I scraped it together. $200, and I was told I'd waste my last $50. $200 for a warm, dry, watered home on land that cost me $25 a month to sit on, when the rent that broke me had been $800. I think about that scrapyard owner sometimes and the look he gave me, and I don't feel bitter anymore. I feel something steadier than that. Because the people who wrote me off weren't cruel exactly. They were repeating what they'd been taught, the same thing I'd been taught, that a home is something you rent or buy from someone who owns it, that water is something you pay for, that if you fall through the cracks, there's no way back up except through the very systems that dropped you. And I proved, with my own 2 hands and a stack of other people's garbage, that none of that is completely true. So here's what I know now, from inside the home I built for $200. You are not as trapped as they told you. The material to rebuild a life is lying in dumpsters and lots and on corkboards at feed stores all over this country, and the knowledge to make dirty water clean is older than any bill you've ever received, and it costs almost nothing. I didn't beat the system. I just stopped waiting for it, and I looked at what everyone else threw away, and I built a life out of it. If you're the kind of person who refuses to be written off, who's tired of being told that dignity is something you have to be able to afford, then you already have the one thing that matters most, and it isn't money. It's the willingness to see value where everyone else sees trash. That's who this whole story is for. Now, I want to hear from you, and I mean this directly, because I know a lot of you watching don't usually leave a comment, and I'm asking you to this time. Which part surprised you most? The biosand filter made of sand in a thrown-away barrel, or the fact that 1 inch of rain on a small roof gives you 60 gallons for free? Tell me in the comments, and tell me where you're watching from, and tell me the first thing you would build if you started this week. I read them, I answer them. And if any part of you felt something loosen while you watched this, some knot of fear about money or shelter or water, then stay with me. Subscribe and stand with the rest of us who are quietly rebuilding a home and our dignity from nothing, one salvaged piece at a time, because you are not alone in this, and you never were. In the next story, I'm going to show you how I heated this whole box through a winter that hit 6 degrees using a single clay pot and a heat source that cost me under $10, and how it kept me warm all night long. I'll see you there. You're still here, so this next part is for you. The full salvage build, barrel to tap, every step I couldn't fit, that lives inside my membership, the shelter builders, picking up right where I stopped. In there, you can ask me your own question, and I answer you myself, a real person. You won't be doing this alone. Just point your phone's camera at the code on the screen. And you can cancel anytime. Now, having a home is only the start. Next, I'll show you how to build a warm, safe shelter in just 5 minutes, spending nothing at all. It could help someone you love. It's starting right here.